Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our next presentation. So this one's going to be called the who, what, when, where, and just who, what, when, where of geospatial data governance. Our speaker is going to be Thomas Tyner. He is a project manager, senior project manager, and geospatial practice director for ARORA Engineers. He has over 30 years of professional experience in the government sector, working with transportation, public works, and utility industries. Tom is a photogrammetrist and is a GISP that specializes in large-scale asset inventories, such as pavement and other transportation assets, including design and development of enterprise-level management systems that leverage web technologies as well as mobile. Over the past few years, Tom has been the principal investigator on several geospatial strategic planning studies. Again, please hold all your questions until the end of the presentation. For our virtual attendees, please put your questions in the chat box. Also, make sure your name is correct on the Zoom login to get credit for attending. This session is being recorded and will be available on the conference website in a few weeks after the event. So, turn it over to you, Tom.
Oh, presentation control.
And I have passed over the control. We are using a PDF for this one, so you may need to use the up and down arrows. If that's not working for you, I can advance on cue.
Hold on. Technical difficulties. Apologize for that. Okay. Next. Let's see. Yeah, she just did it. Let me figure that out. All right, I forgot that I gave a long bio for this, but first off, it's, who is this guy, right? So I'm really a data geek. I've been doing this stuff for about 35 years in a variety of, different industries. So I've done work at the municipal, state, county level. I've worked for DOTs as well, and currently I'm like in the aviation space. So a lot of similar problems in all of those industries related to data governance. I have done some road mapping studies, which I'm going to go over today. And I'm currently involved in a ACRP study. That's the TRB, the Airport Cooperative Research Program. And it's to create like guidelines of policies and procedures related to geospatial governance. So ARORA is a system-ready specialty partner for Esri, and we're also indoor specialty partners. Next slide. So first thing I wanted to do is I was doing a little bit of research on, the definition of geospatial data governance, and one from geospatial world was that it can be identified as the use of geospatial technology to spatially enable policymakers to make informed decisions, right? And then I was like, okay, well, that's pretty good, but it's very, broad. So let's look at Esri Canada. They define it as a process organizations use to monitor and overseeing decisions about their geospatial capabilities. I was like, okay, that's really true as well. So I just put a simple one here: policies, procedures, and culture, which is extremely important, that an organization enacts to document, streamline the collection, use, maintenance, and distribution of that geospatial information. Next slide. And those are some of the things I'm going to talk about today: is the policies and the procedures. So first is the who. Is that you? Are you basically the champion of the geospatial technology, implementation at your organization? And when I say geospatial, I mean all different types of, geospatial information. So BIM being the building information models, which is relatively new, but a lot of design engineers are designing in BIM, CAD, as well as GIS. So part of that, the first step is a steering committee. Do you have a steering committee? Do you have like executive level leadership that's involved in, really charting out the direction of the geospatial implementation that you have at your organization? And part of that is really defining what the culture is. Excuse me. So it's really the culture and really guiding the organization. If you don't have that executive leadership, you're not going to have the full adoption by your organization and moving forward with developing a geospatial program. Change management is huge. We've talked, the earlier speakers have talked about that a little bit, where, implementing change is always difficult within an organization. And then you also need the executive elite, the steering committee really needs to, implement like a training program to get everyone to really look at adopting the technology. They're instrumental in developing KPIs, so key performance indicators. Not only are you implementing GIS, but how are we measuring how successful that GIS program is? And then establishing priorities, really looking at the budget, the schedule, as well as risk management. A lot of people don't really think about, risks, but, from an executive level, you want to look at risks, like what are we implementing? How much is that going to cost? What are the, possible failure points, and how do we, mitigate those failure points? Next slide. So, the high level is the steering committee. Then you get to a technical committee, right? And some of you folks may or may not be on a technical committee right now, or started out within your organization, to really look at the nuts and bolts on how everything's working. Someone is the champion that's reporting to the steering committee, on all of the the different priorities, as well as the staffing needs. Because as your program evolves, you may need to hire another GIS analyst or a developer, and justify why you're doing that. Monitor and resolve technical issues. So there may be, if you're, let me just ask the audience, how many people are requiring like digital submissions at this point in time for anything, whether it be utilities or subdivisions? Only a couple folks in the audience. Okay. Requiring that, but that's going to be one of the first steps. So it may be, requiring digital submissions and then having a process and developing data standards around that. So you get the standards into your contract documentation. Once you get the standards into your documentation, you're getting these digital submissions. You need a way to validate that data, meets those specific standards. And then you could develop like ETL process or extract, transfer, and load to take that CAD data and push that into the GIS environment. So you develop those kind of workflows. And once again, you're monitoring the schedule and budget. Someone's reporting up to the steering committee just to make sure that we're all aligned. Next slide is the who, and there may be many of you in here right now are the data stewards, those that are, maintaining the different geospatial data. You're providing, input to the technical committee. This is the different data that we need. This is the support we need to maintain that data. Establishing the workflows, which I mentioned about, FME, using FME to do some translations. And you're the ones that are really leveraging the technology. So you're familiar with, the Esri tools, using ArcGIS Hub, or portal sites if you're using that, and all of the different types of mobile devices that are out there. And you're really the ones that are maintaining those authoritative sources. So that's kind of like the structure. You have a steering committee, you have a technical committee, and then the data users. Next slide, please. So what do we manage? We manage both, several different things. And we try to make it very easy to understand for the executives. We look at data systems, and really from a road mapping standpoint, we look at organizational as well. But here I'm putting like actions, like, who's doing what. Next slide. So the who, what, where, the what is, part of that is the data. You all have a lot of different inventory, information right now, whether we're talking about, tax maps or parcels, land use, utility. Pavement is obviously an expensive, asset that you need to maintain. What are the policies and the procedures that you have in place right now? Those are some of the things that we go over, during like a road mapping process. You want to have those policies like and I'm going to, talk about the same scenarios over and over again. So that it basically, takes seed. But really the policies are at the executive level, having those digital standards, standards to submit data in your contract language, and then developing policies and procedures to actually, integrate that in with your GIS system. And then we have the metadata, which is extremely important. A lot of people do not, complete the metadata, but the way that I look at it, it's complex if you look at entering all of the information related to, a metadata record. But it's really important to at least have when that data was created, who was responsible for that data, and, how often and what's the frequency of maintaining that data. And then we look at Imagery Services. Back in the day when I first started doing, creating digital orthos for either a municipality or a county, and creating planimetric and contours. There was a long schedule associated with that. Well, now they have Imagery Services, a couple of Pictometry, which is now EagleView, and NearMap, which provides subscription services to get updated imagery once or twice a year. So it's a lot less cost and, a really great source for that imagery. Next slide, please. So we talk about data, now we talk about systems, right? This is where all the value is in the actual, and I say systems and not just applications, because the more challenging, but the more beneficial and a return on investment is when you're talking about integrating those, GIS with other third-party systems. It could be the assessor's office to get tax information integrated with your parcels to serve that out to your users. Could be public works with asset management. We saw a little bit about that on the Trinity Unity system, building permitting, as well as overall lease management. And Esri does, as you know, have a lot of configurable tools. So now you don't even need to be a developer to really get a web application up and running, rather easily. It's not like the old days where you actually had developers writing code to make all of these things happen. Esri has really, come to serve the community by making these configurable apps that are, simple to use. Now, and they both support Android as well as iOS. Field Maps, Survey 123, and Collector are a couple that have already been discussed. And these systems are really helping you support, whether it be federal, state, and or local reporting requirements. Next slide. So the last part of the what is the, actions, because we're kind of talking about organizational right now. So the actions, how do you make this happen? Well, one of the first is having stakeholder meetings. I've talked with a couple of people during this conference, and, I'm asking them how are you developing your applications? How are you serving, the different user communities? And a lot of, having difficulty getting the information out of those different departments on how to really get the value of the GIS, instilled into their departments. Well, have a stakeholder meeting. You sit down and you talk to them about what their business process is. You understand how GIS works, what data you have available. So talk to them about what is their business process, and then working together, you can actually develop functional requirements, which could then roll into developing an application to help them, with their, daily business work. Reporting, establishing and tracking the KPIs. As I mentioned, that's part of what the steering committee is going to want. That's where you're showing the return on investment for your GIS, is by having those key performance indicators. A couple simple ones could be okay, how many users do we have when we start our program? How many applications? And you can see that evolve over time, as well as seeing the overall improved efficiency, because as you're implementing these different applications based on the use cases for the different departments, you're going to see, efficiencies in their work. So those are all things that you want to track and report on, because that's showing you the return on investment that you have for investing in the technology. And then another is, that's very important, is education. Teach and listen. You're teaching them how to use the application, but then you're going to get feedback from them. And getting the feedback is, instrumental in continuing to have them promote the GIS technology, evolving their business processes, and overall, enhancing the overall GIS, implementation. And, a lot of people end up talking about, what they should do with the GIS, but you really have to do it. You have to get an action plan in place and then follow through and make that happen. Next. So when is a good time to start, right? I've talked with several people, over the last couple of days about data governance. Some people talk about, that they want to get that going, but they really haven't, got a structure in place yet. There's a variety of, different scenarios. Some are, a lot more experienced with data governance and have that implemented. But historically, it's been non-existent. I mean, I've been in the business for a long time. The reason that I got into GIS because I was creating all of this data and I wanted to see how the data was going to be used. Well, now we have a lot of data, we have a lot of applications, but we really don't have a program, and a lot of people don't have an overall governance program to make that an efficient and sustainable program. And part of that sustainable program, I roll back to the beginning, is again, having those data standards, having that in the contract language. So when they're building a new road, they're putting a new utility infrastructure, they're building a new subdivision, that you're getting that information in a streamlined fashion so that you can just basically integrate that into your overall GIS solution and the application that you're serving a lot faster. Prioritization's very important. Like, what's going to be the biggest bang for the buck? Some people maybe in this room are just getting started, or have gotten started over the last few years. Some people are very seasoned, but you really want to have that quick win. So, what department can we work with to, enable GIS technology in there to really get a real return on investment? And really the governance program is creating a framework for everything that you're going to be doing. Once again, with that structured tier of a steering committee, technical committee, and then you have your data stewards or the folks that are, maintaining that data. So everyone's involved in the organization. Next. So where to start, right? If you're looking at, there are different maturity models out there. The, National Council of Geographic Information Committee has a maturity model. I have a link to that on the bottom of the screen, and you can use that. And it really has like 3 different levels. So ad hoc, chaotic process is where it begins, right? Some people may be in that right now. We're listening to demands. We're trying to figure out, what are going to be the next steps. The level 2 is a repeatable process, right? So now we've been engaged with implementing GIS. We have some repeatable processes working, but it's not really defined. And, defining these processes is one of the most important things. When we walk into organizations and everyone's doing business every day, and you talk to them about, okay, well, let's lay that out on a Visio diagram. Okay, how are you actually doing that work? A lot of people are like, well, we've never done anything like that before. And you find out a lot about the workflow when you sit there and you start to document that. A lot of pros and cons. And you can look at for areas of improvement by, inserting GIS technology into there. So defining that process is like level 3. And then level 4 is managing that process. So you're not only documenting it, but now you got those KPIs in place. So you're actually measuring the success of your program. And then 5 is, optimized process. So you're defining, managing, and then you're always looking for process improvement. And that's what we want. That's where the value is. That's where you really elevate, geospatial technology in your organization, is where you're showing improvements to efficiency and all the overall work processes. Next slide. So who, what, where, when, and actually I forgot how in the in the title. How are we going to do that, right? So the first, and this is just a process that we followed with separate different agencies. We do a road mapping or a strategic mapping road mapping process. And as you've seen, the theme here is like data systems, and for us in the road mapping is organizational, and that usually becomes the biggest challenge. There's data that's out there. We all have a lot of data. Sometimes it's unorganized. You got all these different silos. You have different versions of the data, but we have a lot of data. We have a lot of systems. We're using ArcGIS Online, and/or Portal. We're using mobile apps to collect data. So we have a good handle on that. But from an organizational standpoint and really having a strategy, that's where things that we've seen, kind of fall off. That there's not really digital I'm talking in general terms, GIS, and/or CAD standards. There's not that policy to require digital submissions from the contractors. And then, so we go through, talk about all of those things with, during stakeholder meetings. And the stakeholder meetings have people from the executive level, but also the individual departments. So they start to learn about what their different processes are. So we document that in a whole, a report of all of the different findings. And we, categorize those by data, systems, and organization. We go over those findings, with the steering committee, and then we sit down and we come up with recommendations. We look at what those recommendations are, and what that does is it really defines what the path forward is. So a whole series of different, tasks and schedule and budgets associated with that to come up with a, full geospatial data governance program. You're looking at the risks. You're looking at, establishing those key performance indicators. And, where that's really providing value is, you're showing the cost benefit of, implementing the technology. And at this point, you're getting everyone within the organization involved in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Next slide, please. So just a couple different ones, like, so, part of that, the report, and, these are things that, all of you in the audience can do. Sit down and have those stakeholder meetings, have those discussions, because you just really need to dig into, what are the work processes for the different departments. You understand the GIS technology, you understand how it can help them. We just need to understand what is their current business process, come up with ways to enhance that business process, those recommendations, and then we come up with a whole program schedule. And here it's just showing an example of like a data track, a system track, and an organizational track, coming up with all of those different tasks. And when you look at, scheduling those out. Next slide. Risk management is obviously very important. Just look at it as you were looking to move to somewhere, right? Well, you need to know where you're going to move to. You want to look at what the risks are involved in moving. You want to look at what the impacts and describe what the indicators of those are, as well as like mitigation steps. So when I'm going to buy a house, I'm not looking to move into an area that has a high crime rate, right? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to look into an area that has, a lot of flooding. One of my ways on mitigating flooding is, has the house been elevated? Those types of things. But let's apply that to, the geospatial technology. And you come up with all of these different, potential risks, ways to mitigate those risks. And then you, and the indicators associated with that as well. Next slide. So, and then just, in closing, how would this, benefit, your organization? One, it's really creating that, overall, structure to your program. You're creating policies, right? So you're having contract language, you have the data standards, and, part of it is that a lot of organizations may have different types of data standards, and they may actually have contract language, but the enforcement is a whole nother issue. Making sure that the contractors are actually delivering that data in that standardized formats. And there are, ways in which to, double check and make sure during the design process to make sure that they're actually, aligning with those standards. And then you're establishing processes, right? I mentioned before, everyone's doing work, but how did they actually document the process in which they're doing work and look for ways to enhance that? So you're documenting that. You want consistency in the data that you're developing, as well as the maintenance procedures. You want those documented and repeatable, and you want to overall, you want to have a, increase in efficiency. And then you really want to facilitate team building. And one of the, most challenging one is that positive culture, because this is really implementing technology. The folks, I believe, David, you mentioned it, that it's difficult in adopting a technology, but, almost everyone, I'll say everyone has an iPhone now. Everyone's using like Waze or Apple Maps or something like that. They all know how to use the technology. It's just a matter of whether they want to use it in business to, support their operations. So it's just a cultural change, but having like a steering committee and a real geospatial program, enhances that, because they understand this isn't just someone coming down on me to help me, do my job better. It's really an organizational change. And that provides some level of, accountability, obviously, because if you're tracking these KPIs, these key performance indicators, and looking at the success of your program, there's going to be accountability. And then there's also transparency. These are the things that we've been doing to be successful. So with that, I think that was the last slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, that was it. How did I do on time? Fine. Okay. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Yeah. What's the, what's the, implementing a geospatial program, what is the most, the toughest challenge, right? I captured that. For me and, for the customers that we've worked with, it really is the cultural change, because and that's what you need to focus on, and educating them on what the technology is, how that'll help them, how it'll benefit them. And that it's not only, it's not only that individual or that group that they're looking at, it's an overall organizational change. And I think the adoption of the geospatial technology and automation, is in its infancy, and it'll get better and better and better. Anyone else? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.